Denver, Colorado, 1953. In a courtroom, a jury is listening to the story of a machine. The machine is called a doodlebug. Its salesmen say it can find oil in the ground, and that it can do this because of what powers it. Not conventional science, saucer science. Technology recovered, so the pitch goes, from a flying saucer that came down near a little town called Aztec, New Mexico. The men selling it are Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer. The book behind them is Frank Scully's Behind the Flying Saucers, published in 1950, the volume that gave America its first crashed saucer gospel and gave the town of Aztec a permanent place in the mythology. The jury convicts. Fraud. Hold on to how rare this is. In 80 years of flying saucers, this is the only UFO deception ever adjudicated in a courtroom, tested under oath, under cross-examination, and under the rules of evidence. And the verdict, entered in the record in Denver in 1953, is that a cornerstone of the lore was a swindle. That is documented. It is a court record.
1953 is the year this subject shows you both of its faces at once. In a Denver courtroom, a private con, belief converted into money until a jury stops it. And in Washington, that same January, behind closed doors, a panel of physicists convened by the Central Intelligence Agency is writing belief into policy, how to reduce it, how to monitor the people who hold it. One is a crime. The other is a government function. And the uncomfortable part of this episode is how much they have in common.
Last episode ended with a question. After the summer of 1947, after Arnold, after Roswell, after 2 officers died at Kelso, the government's answer was to build an office to study flying saucers. But an office that studies a phenomenon and an office that manages a public look identical from the outside. Same desks, same letterhead. This episode, the record lets us watch the one become the other. A study that hardens into a posture, a courtroom that prices the belief, and a panel that writes the management of that belief into the policy of the United States. Almost everything in this hour is documented. We will tell you out loud the moments it isn't. This is the Deception Thread, Episode 5, Belief Management. We begin where Episode 4 left the thread, September 1947. General Twining's classified memorandum. The phenomenon is, in its words, something real and not visionary or fictitious, and the recommendation for a formal study. That study takes shape at Wright-Patterson under Air Materiel Command and runs through 1948 into 1949. Its classified name is Project Sign. Its public name is different. To the newspapers, it is Project Saucer. Notice that. The American government's first office for flying saucers is born speaking 2 languages, one name for the inside, one for the outside. That is ordinary military practice. It proves nothing by itself. But it is worth marking on the first page of this story. From day one, what the office was called depended on who was asking. Inside Sign, the story goes, something remarkable happened. Somewhere in 1948, the project's analysts are said to have produced a document called the Estimate of the Situation, an internal assessment that reportedly came down in favor of the interplanetary hypothesis. The saucers, it concluded, were most likely craft from somewhere else. The estimate went up the chain, and the chain said no. General Hoyt Vandenberg, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, is said to have rejected it for lack of proof and ordered it destroyed. Now the flag, spoken plainly because this is one of the most quoted stories in the subject. The estimate of the situation is contested. We know of it chiefly through one man, Captain Edward Ruppelt, who later ran Blue Book and wrote the memoir that made the story famous. The document itself does not survive. No copy has ever surfaced. A destroyed document you cannot read is not evidence of what it said. It is a story about a document. We will treat it that way.
The estimate is a perfect little test of everybody's discipline, including ours. Believers cite it as proof the Air Force knew and buried it. Skeptics cite it as proof The project had gone credulous and needed adult supervision. Both readings lean their whole weight on a document nobody alive has read, sourced through one officer's memoir. On our board, it gets one line: contested, single-sourced, unrecoverable. What it actually documents isn't the saucers at all. It's that by 1948, what the study was allowed to conclude was being decided above the study. That part, the rejection from the top, nobody disputes.
Whatever the estimate said, the record of the projects themselves is not contested. And watch what it does next. February 1949. Sign's surviving final report comes down agnostic, leaning toward conventional explanations. An open question, gently deflated. Then Sign is succeeded by a new project, run from the Air Technical Intelligence Center, and the name change tells you everything about the change in weather. The study of the saucers is now called Project Grudge. Grudge is a tonal reversal. Where Sign asked what the objects were, Grudge treats the reports themselves as the problem to be solved. Its August 1949 report attributes the sightings to misidentification, to hoaxes, and, in its own words, to mass hysteria. And it recommends the effort be scaled down. Read that arc again. In under 2 years, the official study of unidentified objects has become a study of the people reporting them, their errors, their frauds, their hysteria, with a recommendation to look less. That is documented. The hardening is in the report's own language. One more line from that same final report, the one history nearly missed. Grudge also recommended its findings be reviewed for, in the file's own words, potentialities for psychological warfare. And that recommendation did not die on the page. Between January and June of 1950, it moves, serial by serial. January, Headquarters tasks the review. February, the Directorate of Intelligence routes it to the Psychological Warfare Division. April, the division answers. Written the 7th of June, coordinated across 3 offices of Air Force Intelligence. Logged out of the Directorate on the 16th, a registered document, control number P19875, addressed to the Commanding General, Air Materiel Command, by command of the Chief of Staff. Subject, opinions on psychological warfare, aspects of Project Grudge. Filed in a clerk's handwriting under 000.9, flying discs. We hold that letter, and this time we are not guessing at the contents because the contents are the point. Paragraph 2 concurs with Air Materiel Command's own conclusion, the command that ran the saucer study, that, quote,
planned release of unusual aerial objects, coupled with the release of related psychological propaganda, could cause mass hysteria.
Read that again, slowly. In June 1950, the United States Air Force put in writing that a flying saucer scare could be manufactured, objects plus propaganda, and the conclusion came out of the Saucer Project's own parent command. One name on the authority line is worth a beat, by command of the Chief of Staff, and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force in June 1950 is Hoyt Vandenberg, the same name this hour attached to the estimate. Now the flag. That line is boilerplate. Every headquarters letter carries it. It does not put this paper on Vandenberg's desk, but sit with the symmetry anyway. The office said to have burned the analyst's conclusion is the office under whose name the price list for a manufactured saucer scare went out the door. The same letter then prices the idea. Employing it in a foreign land, it says, would demand such intelligence, such planning, such control of conditions as to be impracticable, more resources spent than return attained. And it names the best available device for creating mass hysteria, the high-altitude plastic balloon, 100,000 feet, the kind flown for weather work in cosmic ray research. Then it adds, almost as an aside, that several of the actual sightings were probably exactly that. Hold the loop that just closed. The object judged most likely to explain the saucers and the object judged best for staging them are the same object. And the letter's last instruction is about filing. These comments, it says, should be retained by your headquarters as a part of that file. The closed case gets a psychological warfare annex, by order. Now the discipline, before anyone runs with this. The letter is 1950 looking backward. It proposes nothing. Its own verdict on the idea, abroad, is not worth it. This episode does not claim the wave of 1947 was such an operation, and neither does this letter. What the letter removes, permanently, is the argument that nobody in the government ever thought of it. They thought of it, they wrote it down, they priced it, and they filed it under flying discs. And mark the desk itself because the record lets us follow it. The branch that wrote the June price list. Technical capabilities, Directorate of Intelligence, the same major, the same phone extensions, reappears 4 months later with a different problem. The press. On the 11th of October 1950, the branch chief's name goes out on instructions to Wright-Patterson about releasing the results of saucer analysis. Wright-Patterson had asked for authority to release full details. Headquarters said no. Detailed release, inadvisable. Anything of technical intelligence value, withheld and forwarded to Washington. And for the newspapers, one statement, pre-written, with a blank where the incident goes.
We have investigated and evaluated blank incident and have found nothing of value and nothing which would change our previous estimates on this subject.
A denial written before the investigation it reports on. That is a posture reduced to a form. So hold the corridor in one frame. June. This desk prices what a manufactured saucer scare would cost. October. This desk writes the fill-in-the-blank answer the public will get, whatever comes in. The office that assessed belief as a weapon and the office that managed the story of it were not two offices. They were one corridor. Meanwhile, in the one corner of the map where the sightings touched something the government could not shrug at, a different kind of study was born and starved. Since 1948, observers in New Mexico had been reporting green fireballs over the most sensitive real estate in the Western world. Los Alamos, Sandia, Kirtland, White Sands, the nuclear corridor. The response in 1950 was Project Twinkle, an instrumented network of cameras and spectrographs run by the Air Force's Cambridge Research Laboratories, with the camera stations operated under contract by a company called Land Air. For once, instruments instead of opinions. It should have been the most scientific effort of the era. It was underfunded and barely manned. It gathered little usable data. It was discontinued in December 1951, and its final report in February 1952 reached no definite conclusion at all. And note who else was drawn in. The clustering of the fireballs over the nuclear installations brought the FBI into the file, and the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI, Counterintelligence. Remember that acronym. This is its first appearance in our story. It will not be the last.
Twinkle is the tell hiding in the budget line. The one time in this whole period the government pointed actual instruments at the sky. It gave the job almost no money and almost no people, and let it die in 18 months. At the same moment, the effort to characterize the reporting public, the hoaxers, the hysterics, was getting signed reports and policy recommendations. Money is a posture statement. And notice the reflex, because the whole season keeps finding it. Lights over the nuclear complex get treated as a security problem, a people and places problem, before they ever get treated as a science problem. The apparatus studied the watchers and watched the ground.
In 1952, the study is reorganized one more time into the name it will carry to its grave, Project Blue Book. Its first director is Captain Edward Ruppelt, a serious man by most accounts, and the man who, tired of the comic strip sound of flying saucers, coins a new term, unidentified flying object, UFO. Blue Book will run for 17 years. Its final ledger, when it closes in December 1969, roughly 12,618 reports. Of those, 701, after everything, remain marked unidentified. Its official conclusions: no threat to national security, no evidence of extraterrestrial vehicles, nothing beyond known science.
Even the vocabulary got managed, and I don't think Ruppelt gets enough credit, or blame, for it. Flying saucer is a tabloid word. You can't put it in a threat assessment without smirking. Unidentified flying object is a filing category. Bloodless, bureaucratic, deliberately boring. Renaming a thing is the gentlest form of belief management there is. It moves a subject from the front page to the in tray. I use the word UFO every day of my life, and it was coined inside the office whose institutional arc, by then, was to make the subject smaller. Sit with that.
And the posture traveled. In these same years, other governments ran the same experiment and reached for the same language. In Britain, a flying saucer working party under the Ministry of Defense's scientific intelligence side sat from 1950 to 1951, concluded the sightings were misidentifications, hoaxes, or delusion, and advised against further investigation. In Canada, two small efforts, Project Magnet under the Department of Transport and the Defense Research Board's Project Second Story, ran quietly and ended inconclusively. So the hardening was not uniquely American, but nowhere else did the paper trail run so deep or the machinery around the story grow so large. This is an American story mostly because America wrote the most of it down. And here is the pattern that makes this act matter. The study's own data, out of step with the study's own voice. In 1955, the Air Force contracted the Battelle Memorial Institute to do what should settle everything: a statistical study of about 3,200 cases, Blue Book Special Report number 14. The Air Force publicized it as proof that UFOs were explainable and no threat. The data cut the other way. About a fifth of the cases remained unidentified. The better documented a case was, the more likely it stayed unknown. The opposite of what you'd expect if the unknowns were just bad reporting. And the knowns and the unknowns differed from each other at a statistically significant level. The tension between that data and that press release is documented. It sits inside a single report. Step back and read the whole arc, 1948 to 1955, the way an auditor would. Three patterns recur. First, the institutional stance moves in one direction only, from signs open question to grudges active debunking toward managed closure. Second, at the points where the cases are actually counted, a substantial residue stays unexplained, in quiet tension with the reassuring public summaries. Third, from 1950 onward, a date you no longer have to take on trust, the June 1950 letter you just heard fixes it. The explicit object of policy becomes as much the management of public belief, the watching of civilian researchers, and the security of sensitive ground as the phenomenon itself. Those three sentences are not this show's thesis. They are a plain description of the record. Act 3 is where the third one gets written down as policy.
Let me be careful with what that pattern proves, because it's less than the believers want and more than the debunkers admit. A residue of unknowns doesn't prove saucers. Any messy, voluntary reporting system leaves a residue. That's what noise looks like. If Special Report 14 had never existed, I'd tell you the unknowns were probably mostly noise, and I'd mean it. What the pattern proves is narrower, and to me, more interesting. From Grudge onward, the summaries stopped describing the data. The numbers said, a stubborn residue, worse in the good cases. The press releases said, nothing to see. When a study's conclusions stop tracking its contents, the study has stopped being a study. It has become a posture, and postures are policy.
A posture needs an author. Before we watch Washington write it down, in a panel room in January 1953, the thread runs through a courtroom in Denver. Because while the Air Force was learning to manage the story of the saucers, two men in Colorado were demonstrating in cash exactly what the story was worth. 1950, a writer named Frank Scully publishes a book called Behind the Flying Saucers. It tells of a saucer down near Aztec, New Mexico, recovered, hidden, its science quietly harvested. The book sells, and the story enters the bloodstream of the subject, where it remains in one form or another to this day. The Aztec crash becomes a cornerstone of UFO lore. And on the back of that book, a business. Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer sell doodlebugs, detection devices, they say, that can find oil in the ground, powered by the recovered science of the saucers. Think about the architecture of that pitch for a moment. Oil detection is a claim a customer can test only slowly, expensively, and ambiguously. Saucer technology is a claim a customer cannot test at all. It ends in Denver in 1953, in the fraud convictions you heard at the top of the hour. And the show wants you to feel the weight of the venue. Nearly everything in this series lives in memos, memoirs, and inference. This one lives in a court record. Witnesses under oath, evidence under rules. A jury with no stake in saucers either way. The only time the machinery of adjudication has ever closed its hands around a UFO deception. And when it did, the deception was a con. Documented, the strongest flag we have.
People ask me why I keep bringing up Newton and Gebauer when the case has nothing to do with the government. That's exactly why. It's the control sample, the one UFO deception we can examine end to end. Motive, method, market, collapse. Because subpoena power did the work no researcher can. And what it shows is that by 1950, belief in crashed saucers was liquid. You could convert it into money. There was a market. And here's the rule the rest of the season leans on. Where a belief becomes a market, professionals show up. Most of them want your wallet. Some of them want something else.
Now watch what the verdict did to the story. Nothing. That is the second lesson of Aztec, and it may matter more than the first. A jury found the foundation of the tale to be a swindle in 1953, and the tale simply kept going. It outlived the verdict by decades. It acquired defenders, revivals, reinvestigations. The men were convicted. The story was not. Exposure, it turns out, is not fatal to a belief that people want. A conviction is a fact. A story is an organism. You have seen this before in this very season. Aurora, Texas, a crash invented by the record's own reconstruction to revive a dying town, survived its debunking. Maury Island was privately admitted to be slagged by the men who told it in the summer of 1947, and it grew a body count and the men in black anyway. Now Aztec, adjudicated a swindle by a jury and effectively immortal. 3 exposures, 3 survivals. When this season reaches the modern era, the documents, the whistleblowers, the disclosures, remember the base rate established here at the beginning. In this subject, a story that has been killed in public does not die. And the people who manage belief for a living know that better than anyone. There is one more piece to Aztec, and it is the kind of piece this season must handle with tongs. Decades later, the researcher Carl Flock surfaced a claim from Silas Newton's unpublished memoir. In it, Newton is said to have recalled that government men approached him and encouraged him to keep telling the story. Say the flag with us, because this is what a hard flag sounds like: contested, single-sourced. An unpublished manuscript by a convicted con man about himself surfaced secondhand after his death. There is no file, no name, no corroboration.
And notice, that claim is tailor-made for this show. The state finding a con already running and quietly keeping it alive because the noise was useful? That's our thesis with a bow on it, which is precisely why it gets the harshest treatment on the board. The claims that flatter your hypothesis are the ones that ruin you. A con man's unpublished memoir saying the government wanted me to lie is also exactly what a con man would write for free. So it sits at contested, and it does not move, not into the argument, not into the ledger, unless corroboration surfaces. A document, a payment, a name that checks out. Until then, Aztec proves a market and nothing more. That's the discipline, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts.
So hold the two clean facts Denver gives us, and only those. First, by 1950, saucer belief could be monetized. The market was real, and the professionals had arrived. Second, exposing a deception does not end it. The lie outlives the verdict. Now put yourself in the seat of a government that has spent 3 years learning both of those facts from its own files. A government whose study of the sky has already become a study of its public. A flood of belief it cannot switch off. A market it cannot regulate. A phenomenon it has officially decided is nothing, arriving in its intelligence channels at a rate that is very much something. In the summer of 1952, that flood crested over Washington itself. And the response in January 1953 was not a bigger study, it was a policy. The summer of 1952 put unidentified objects over the capital of the United States, the Great Washington Flap, and the reports did something no saucer had managed in 5 years of headlines. They clogged the channels of intelligence. That is the frame to keep. What alarmed the Central Intelligence Agency by its own record was not primarily what was in the sky, it was the traffic. A public that reports everything is a public whose reports can bury a real warning, and a channel that can be flooded by accident can be flooded on purpose. So in January 1953, the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence convened a scientific panel chaired by the physicist H.P. Robertson. Among its members, the astronomer Thornton Page. Remember him. He returns at the end of this act, 13 years later, in a way the panel's defenders would rather he didn't. The panel reviewed the cases and found no direct physical threat, but it judged the volume of reports an indirect one. And then it made its recommendations. The sentences this entire episode exists to read to you. Its proceedings are documented in what is called the Durant Report, declassified in stages, and what they recommend is this: that the phenomenon be stripped of what the record calls its aura of mystery by a mass media debunking campaign to reduce public interest, and by the monitoring of civilian UFO groups. Debunk and monitor. In January 1953, the management of what Americans believe about flying saucers and the watching of the citizens organized around that belief was written down as the recommendation of a panel convened by the Central Intelligence Agency. That is not an inference of this show. It is in the declassified record. It is documented. And now the precision this season insists on, spoken slowly. What is documented is belief management. Nobody in that room is recorded proposing to fake a sighting. This episode does not claim the sightings were manufactured. That claim gets no free rides here. What the record shows is a decision about the story. Steer it downward and watch its believers. You do not have to fake the sky to control the story about it.
Read charitably, and we should read it charitably first. The Robertson panel is Cold War hygiene. It's 1953. The channels that have to carry warning of Soviet bombers are choking on lights in the sky. Draining the swamp of false reports is a legitimate air defense problem, and a debunking campaign is a rational, even boring, answer to it. But sit with the second recommendation, monitoring civilian groups, private citizens organized around a belief, listed for watching, not because they'd done anything, but because of what they believed and might amplify. You don't need a single exotic assumption for that to matter. A state that watches believers is a state that has started treating belief as terrain. And terrain, in the professions this season keeps meeting.
And mark how the two recommendations fit the machinery you already know. A mass media campaign to reduce interest needs an instrument. And the instrument at hand was the Office Act 1 just walked you through. Blue Book, the government's public face on the subject, whose parent service is about to receive this very report, stamped for action. The monitoring of civilian groups needs an instrument too. In January 1953, the civilian groups barely exist. Within 4 years, the largest and most credible of them all will be founded in Washington. And the question of who sat inside it is the next 3 episodes of this series. Policy first. Then the world rearranges itself around the policy. Keep the order of events. It matters. For decades, the official coda to this story was reassuring. The panel met, wrote its report, and then, the story goes, the agency simply stepped away. The CIA's own official history, written by its history staff, published in 1997, describes the position the agency took when the panel's report went out. One sentence, and mark the verb at the end of it.
No further consideration of the subject appeared warranted.
No further consideration warranted. The report was distributed to the Intelligence Advisory Committee, the Secretary of Defense, Civil Defense. The draft directive was abandoned, and the agency, by its own history's account, stepped back and locked the door behind it. Hold that verb, warranted. You will hear it again in a moment, on a different page, pointed the other way. Because that was the record, until a single sheet of paper surfaced at the National Archives. It was cleared for release on the 15th of January 1985, about 6 years before the CIA's own copy of the panel report came out. It is a routing slip, standard Pentagon stationery, an SD Form 32, clipped to the CIA's transmittal of the Robertson Report from the Office of the Secretary of Defense's Central Files, folder CD 000.92, Pentagon Control Number 02610, in the Archives Catalog, item D085. This show has told you before. The files have serial numbers, and we will always give you the serial numbers. Here is what the paper plainly shows. Documented, all of it. The CIA sent the Secretary of Defense a copy of the panel report under a cover letter dated the 13th of March, 1953, signed by Richard Drain. It reached the Pentagon's administrative office on the 17th of March and was logged. On its way, it paused at the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, the initials read as NASH, marked for information only. And someone senior wrote a sentence on it, 7 words.
This report appears to warrant action.
Action. And then the action itself, logged. A copy of the letter and the report ordered sent by memo to the Secretary of the Air Force, the department that ran Project Blue Book. The send-out entered the log on the 2nd of April, 1953. Reference, Log 5, 1391. Within 3 weeks of receiving the CIA's report, the Pentagon formally handed it to the agency in charge of the government's public face on flying saucers, with a senior hand's note that it warranted action. Now set the 2 sentences side by side because they share a verb. The agency, as the report went out, no further consideration of the subject appeared warranted. The Pentagon, with the same report in hand, this report appears to warrant action. Appeared warranted, appears to warrant, the same word aimed in opposite directions, one closing a file, one opening one. The history and the slip do not contradict each other. They describe 2 buildings doing 2 different things with the same report. What does not survive the slip is the comfortable version, that after the panel met, nothing happened anywhere. Something happened. It was logged. There is an irony in the paper's own journey worth savoring. The slip that contradicts the official story sat in the open, cataloged, years before the official story's own file was released. Nobody noticed for a long time. Archives do not hide things the way thrillers imagine. They hide things the way addicts do, in plain sight, under a control number, waiting for someone to ask for the right box. This season exists because someone kept asking for the right boxes. And now, because this show argues against itself or it is worthless, here is everything that slip cannot tell you. Nobody defined action. It could mean begin the public debunking and training program the report recommends. It could mean nothing grander than, Air Force, this UFO business is yours. Handle it. The paper does not say which. The form carries a printed list of Pentagon offices, and one of them, the eye is drawn to it, is an Office of Psychological Policy. But that printed list is the form's standard menu. not a record of who received this report. Only two offices were in the real chain: International Security Affairs for information and the Air Force for action. Anyone who tells you the routing slip proves the report went to the psychological warfare people is reading the menu, not the meal. And the one document that would settle what action meant, the memo of the 2nd of April itself, is not in hand. We have the log entry. We do not have the memo.
Log 51391. One sheet of paper, somewhere in the record group, that would close this question, because whoever wrote that memo had to say, in words, what the Air Force was being told to do. That's an open collection task, and it's ours. Pull the April 2nd memo. And here's why we keep a pull list at all. Last revision, this show listed the Psychological Warfare Division's 1950 comments as an open task, direction unknown. They surfaced as a June 1950 letter to Air Materiel Command, and they moved a flag. Exactly the way this method says the record works, when you keep asking for the right boxes. What's still out from that file? The letter's enclosure one, the balloon data itself, and the Air Materiel Command conclusion the letter concurs in, sitting somewhere in the closed grudge record. Until we have them, here's where the honest analyst stands. The slip proves the report moved, and that somebody senior wanted movement. It is completely neutral on intent, psychological campaign, or bureaucratic handoff. The slip smiles and says nothing. Its real weight only shows up when you stack it, and the stack now starts earlier than it used to, and heavier. Bottom layer, June 1950. The Air Staff's letter closing out Grudge's Psychological Warfare Review, the one you heard in Act 1. Not a hint, not a routing slip. The concept in words, objects plus propaganda equals mass hysteria. The mechanism named balloons. The verdict attached, impracticable, abroad. Then the psychological warfare names on the CIA file's own distribution list. Then the memo from October 1952 over the name Raber that openly floats the United States using flying saucers against the enemy. He wasn't introducing an idea. The Air Force had already concurred in it, priced it, and filed it 2 years earlier. And there's Thornton Page, a member of the panel, writing privately to Fred Durant, the panel's own secretary, on the 8th of September 1966, that he helped organize the CBS broadcast around the Robertson panel conclusions. The letter sits in a name box, in a name folder, in the Smithsonian's archives. 13 years after the panel disbanded, a panelist quietly bending national television toward the panel's line. Stack those, and the slip becomes the bureaucratic link between CIA recommends a program and the Air Force is told to act. The newest page of a file that had been open since 1950. But I want the flag said properly. Every piece of that stack is documented. The assembly is a hypothesis.
So weigh it all, the way the season has taught you. The mundane explanation earns its seat. 1953 was a frightened year. Flooded channels are a real defense problem. Panels of serious scientists do fast work and go home. And a routing slip ordering the Air Force to handle its own subject may be the most boring document in this hour. All of that can be true. What it does not explain away, a written national policy of debunking, the watching of citizens for what they believed, a panelist shaping broadcast television toward the panel's verdict 13 years on, and an official history that says never carried out, sitting in the same archive as a slip that says warrants action. The lesson of 1953 is the cheapest one in the whole ledger. You do not have to fake the sky to control the story about it. Steering belief costs less than manufacturing it, and unlike the sky, the steering leaves a paper trail. A report with a serial number, a slip with 7 words on it, a log entry waiting in a record group. Seed, amplify, manage, harvest. This was the manage chapter. The year the management stopped being improvised and became policy. And notice what the state's answer to the saucers was: never. A bigger camera network. Twinkle got 18 underfunded months over the most sensitive ground in the country and died without a conclusion. The answer that endured was a posture, a press strategy, and a watch list. Study the sky a little. Study the believers a lot. So one more time, who benefits? Silas Newton in dollars until the jury. An Air Force that got permission to stop investigating and start reassuring. And an agency whose file says in writing, reduce the public's interest and watch the people who keep it. Whoever else benefited, that is what the rest of this season is for. Next time on the Deception Thread. The Robertson panel wrote monitor civilian groups into policy, and within 4 years, the most respected civilian UFO organization in America is born. In January 1957, a retired admiral steps to a microphone in Washington and tells the country the saucers are under intelligent control. Standing among the organization's founding officers, a vice chairman who was a psychological warfare specialist by trade, a man whose work went out over the Voice of America. Its board would soon read like an intelligence community reunion. Because if you wanted to know what civilians believed, and to shape it, you would not stand outside their organizations, filing reports. You would sit on the board. Episode 6, Building a Front.
Thank you for taking the time to listen. Remember, we don't teach you what to believe, we teach you how to think. This is the Circle Jerk.